Hello, this is Gary Johnson. Today is April 6th, 2011, and we are at the Chicago History Museum. Senator, could you please state your name for the record?
Adlai Stevenson III.
And for future reference, have you ever done an oral history before? Interviewed in a project like this along the way?
I've done one or two.
Can you remember where a researcher might find those if they wanted to get further information?
But they wouldn't be about me,
Right.
about other people, including my father. I'll have to look up in the records, see what I can find.
If you could give that a little thought, because that might be helpful for someone who wants to dig deeper. We're here to discuss initially your memories of the late Mayor Richard J. Daley, but we're also going to take the opportunity to discuss your life. So let's begin with Mayor Daley. Can you remember the first time that you met him?
No, I can't. I can remember when it was, because he served in my father's cabinet as governor. But we were rarely, the kids were rarely in Springfield. We were away at school or traveling. So I really don't remember him very well. He was not part of my father's inner circle either. But I surely would have met him many times then, but got to know him later during my own political career. I will say that my father thought very highly of him as director of the Department of Revenue. And in later years, when he came home from his journeys and assignments to our home in Libertyville, I often heard him get on the phone to Dick Daley to find out, what's going on back home.
Right. So do you have any first impressions of him or general impressions of him from early in your life before you were involved in politics? Any additional thoughts about him at that stage?
No, because my own personal contacts really began with my own political career, which began with him. But this may not be entirely responsive. My father was, really reformed Illinois state government. He recruited the finest professionals he could find, twisted their arms to get him to serve. In those days, you didn't pay to play; you sacrificed to serve. Right. Very few of his senior appointees came bearing the endorsements of campaign contributors. His campaign cost $157,000. Or the endorsements of party leaders, with probably two exceptions, one of which was Richard J. Daley, and probably with the endorsement of Jack Harvey, who was the then Cook County chairman and became a great supporter of my father. The other happened to be the Secretary of Labor, who probably came with a labor endorsement. So he was unusual in that in that respect, and I remember my father doing something really quite unusual for a governor. When Richard J. Daley was contesting Mayor Kennelly, the incumbent mayor, for my father backed the challenger, backed Richard J. Daley. But I can vaguely remember the casual meeting, but I was the kid and I didn't develop my own relationship really until later.
Right. Looking back on Mayor Richard J. Daley's time as mayor, what would you say was his greatest achievement for the city?
Oh my goodness. Well, he was a builder. I remember other politicians saying that, to be remembered and recognized, you had to build monuments, leaving behind, the record of the great administrator, or didn't sort of cut the mustard. And he was a builder. Of course, some of what got built didn't turn out very well. I'm thinking of public housing. Right. I think on the whole, he really was a good administrator. It was uneven. I remember some rather questionable characters, but also some really first-rate public servants. The superintendent of police, for example, with whom I used to work, Wilson.
O.W. Wilson.
O.W. Wilson. I was chairman when I was in this, a little later, when I was chairman of the crime committee in the House. I worked closely with him on city planning. I can't remember all the names now, but there were some really first-rate administrators. And then it would fall off, and you'd run into a Chuck Swibel, who it was a little uneven, but on the whole, he was a first-rate administrator of this great city, but he also had his weak spots, and I'm thinking particularly of race. He was not he was a creature from the back of the yards, a creature, we all are, I guess, of his environment, and sensitivity to the rights and needs of minorities was not, that was a weak spot.
The Daley family, in general, how would you explain their ability to have been in office for so many years in Chicago?
Well, and gets me back to the earlier point too. I remember my father once saying that he thought it was a mistake to try to be mayor and chairman of the Cook County Democratic Organization. Richard J. Daley was both. And I think he derived much of his success as mayor from the power that he derived as chairman of the regular Democratic Organization of Cook County. Now, there too, he was very clever. He's thought of as the boss, but his power as the boss was derivative. The power resided in the ward committeemen. They're the ones who got out the vote, or maybe the money, but they needed him. So they developed, with his guidance, a mutually supportive relationship, which not only created a great, powerful political organization, but a great deal of authority in the mayor. Those committeemen had influence with the aldermen, and the aldermen and the committeemen were sometimes, one and the same. I remember from my book a saying, we recorded sayings over the years, a little Irish boy's prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, O Halloran be thy name. Halloran was the committeeman.
Right. People today, here we are in 2011, I think wouldn't even notice if the mayor was or was not chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party, because that position has so weakened over the years.
And Richard J. Daley has taken very little interest in Richard M. Daley, the son, is never acquired or took that interest in party leadership, and by and large it defaulted to the state central committee chairman. But, you know, in my own experience, I remember when we had our closed-door, they called them slate-making sessions, and they were nominally combinations of the Cook County organization and the State Central Committee, but there was no question as between the two which was top. It was Cook County.
Few questions that we're asking every one of our interviewees. How important was clout in doing business in the city during the Richard J. Daley years?
Well, I never saw it. Certainly it was low by today's standards, and standards everywhere. Money, you know, money was minuscule. I you know, saw evidence of corruption. It's certainly of a small scale by today's standards, and it certainly didn't hurt to have a Sidney Olson or a sponsor if you had a project. But I think that by and large the benefits were distributed on a much more objective basis then, and I don't mean this so much with respect to Richard M. Daley. I think he's been good, but our politics generally now, which is money drenched. Mm-hmm. When I was running, I was never very good at raising money, but I would go to Richard J. Daley, and that's where I'd get much of my money. You know, he was getting it from somewhere. Those committeemen were giving him money, but the money requirements were much lower. I'm sure it was coming from people who, you know, wanted licenses or one thing or another, but I just don't think it was of nearly the scale that we've been exposed to in recent years, generally, not speaking specifically of Chicago.
I suppose I should say that you and I have had some involvements over the years. As a college student, I worked in your Senate campaign in 1970, and we were law partners for a while, and I was involved in your campaigns for governor. And I'm thinking back to the Senate campaign for 1970. I remember one of the big events was, I think it was a $100 a plate dinner, where Mayor Daley was one of the co-chairs, and that was a big successful money-raising event by the standards of your kinds of campaign. And I remember his involvement was one of the elements in making it a success.
He would help maybe get out the vote. That was dollars were raised door to door, but the $100 a plate dinner was kind of the standard means, and Richard J. would be there. He held his own $100 a day plate, and frequently you'd bring in an outside speaker, a prominent senator, governor. Now, that was the standard way that I saw of raising money, not much of which was needed.